Hi everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name is Caroline Englishby, and I'm one of the bereavement support practitioners for the Children and Young Person Service within Winstons Wish. We've also got with us one of our young ambassadors, Scarlett. So she'll be sharing her story of bereavement and the impact the support Winstons Wish has had on her life. But before we hear from Scarlett, I'd like to introduce our two new services to you. So towards the end of 2020, we launched two new services. So we now have a family bereavement support service, which is aimed at parents and carers. The new service is having a huge impact on the way children and young people adapt following the death of a parent or loved one. So this service takes the form of through telephone or video calls, and it provides emotional support and guidance to parents and carers of bereaved children and young people up to the age of 25 to support them in helping their child through their grief. And because of this service, we are able to support hundreds of families a year. We also have the Children and Young People Service, which is the one I work for, and we understand that in addition to the family support, we know that children and young people also need additional support within the family to be supported individually. And so this new service offers a kind of in-depth support, both remotely and face-to-face. Obviously, we've been digital through lockdown, but that's kind of changing. And that way we're able to support the most vulnerable children, and we're actually able to access much more young people as a result of our digital service. And we hope that these two services will help us to deliver our ultimate goal of ensuring that every child can get the support they need when someone dies. And none of this work would be possible without supporters like yourselves. So we thank you very much for that. So I'd like to hand over to Scarlett to tell her story.
Hi, I'm Scarlett. I am a primary school teacher, and I've been a young ambassador for Winstons Wish for nearly 6 years now. And I've been involved with them since I was 6, so about 17 years ago, in 2005. And as a young ambassador, I've had loads of different activities that I've been involved in, like fundraising, supporting at events, attending events as a representative. And most recently, I've been working on a project with lots of other young ambassadors, which was for the UK Trauma Council, where they developed resources for schools for dealing with traumatic bereavement specifically. So I was supported by Winstons Wish back in 2005. And then in 2016, got in contact again to see if they needed any volunteers so I could kind of give back.
Great, okay. So if we can talk about your bereavement, and if you can talk sort of a little bit pre-bereavement, and it was your dad that died. So if you can tell us a little bit about your dad and what he was like as a person.
So as I said, I was only 6 when my dad died, so really young. So I've actually got quite a poor memory of life before he died, or kind of the life soon after. And the earliest memories I have really are about 11, maybe 12, which is obviously 6 years after the death, which kind of puts me in quite a unique position because I do have lots of memories of him, but all formed from hearing what other people's stories are and kind of just joining dots between lots of other people's stories about him and stuff, which has kind of created this abstract person who was my dad, which is really nice in a way because obviously I've only ever heard lovely stories, and I've kind of created this human out of that.
Right, okay. And so when your dad died, how were you told the news of your dad's death?
It was during the summer holidays, just before I was starting year 2, and I was actually in Australia with my mum and my sisters, and my dad was still in the UK when he died, and it was very sudden, completely unexpected. So my mum found out one evening, but I was already in bed, and she called me into her room the following day and told me that he'd passed away, and that I think her words were actually that he'd fallen asleep. And I kind of thought, I wonder why she hasn't said that he's died, because I know what that means. And I think that she maybe didn't expect me to know what that meant. So then we had to obviously get back to the other side of the world after this huge life-changing event. But throughout most of that, I kind of just kept my head down and just got on with it. But I know I was really nervous about starting school again after the summer holidays and going back to school, thinking everyone's going to be talking about me. really nervous about what they might be saying, and it kind of felt very much like people were avoiding me, when in reality I think they were avoiding the conversation, except for a very very good friend I had at the time called Maddie, who I remember wrote me a card and we talked about it all the time. I think she was like strangely intrigued by it, but it just really normalized like bereavement, which I hadn't dealt with at all before, and then obviously became a huge part of my life overnight. Very, very supportive in that.
I think, yeah, that's really interesting, because I think one of the things that we find is that avoidance that people have around talking to children, and I think particularly young children, where there is an avoidance of saying the words, and the fact that your mom used that language around your dad dying. You know, we come across that, and I think, you know, with the two services we've got now, the family bereavement, they can offer parents that support to help guide that. And I think
that's something that I found really challenging, was not being able to talk to anyone about it because it was so not discussed. And I think when you're a child who's just lost one parent, you'll do everything you can to make sure you don't then upset or risk losing the other one. So you wouldn't ever mention it because you know that that person's also grieving. So as much as like a child might not actually understand that, they have a sense about it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I come across that in my work, in that children are worried about the surviving parent, and they're worried about, you know, they're worried about seeing that parent crying. They're worried about, they don't, you know, and it's that support that's required to help young people and children understand that. So I was going to ask you about how did it impact? So you've got sisters, have you? How did it impact the rest of your family?
Yeah, so all of us were very differently affected by it. We were quite different ages at the time. Me and my older sister are 5 years apart, but the age range between 6 and 11 was quite a few different developmental stages. So we all experienced it very differently. So for me, as I said, kind of was completely shut off, didn't form any memories, didn't have anything like that. My middle sister kind of had a typical reaction that you would almost expect, being very angry at the world, very frustrated, not really understanding what happened. And I think my older sister had a similar reaction to me. And I think to be honest, the middle reaction, the one that you would typically expect, there's no right way to grieve, but I think that being able to express it in any kind of a way is going to be a lot more preventative of any future like mental health challenges or trauma than just shutting down completely, which is what I did. And I think that being able to encourage children to speak about it makes such a huge difference. And like I said, normalizing it and not having some taboo or some concerning about upsetting another parent kind of thing, or parents if you've lost a sibling or anything like that, I think it makes a very big difference to their future perception of like communication and just life and death.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, because I think there's something about giving children permission to grieve, and also that, you know, like you've highlighted that, you know, no one person looks the same, no person grieves the same, and it's it's an individual journey, isn't it? And I think that's really important that, you know, you've highlighted that in your family there's 3 different children who've dealt with grief differently.
And
sorry.
I just think, like, for example, going to funerals, that's a really big part within that. So I did go to my dad's funeral, but we didn't go to the burial. But I think that when parents are trying to protect children for something like that, as I know a few of my friends and other young ambassadors, their parents did try and protect them from that, it then doesn't give you a closure or a sense of saying goodbye. That person's just kind of gone with no explanation. And I think that things that you might think initially would protect a child might actually cause further damage further down the line, potentially.
Yeah, 100%. I think those open conversations, regardless, it's like age and stage appropriate, of course, but those conversations allowing young people to explore how they're feeling, we know that if that doesn't happen, then it impacts the future relationships that they're going to go on to have. Absolutely. And it's really important. So can you just thinking about post bereavement, can you tell me something about your bereavement that most people wouldn't have realized?
So for me, as I said, completely shut down, didn't presented as a very typical child. I was very happy. I wasn't especially anxious, kind of similar to what you mentioned earlier. I was usually worrying about my mum if it was late at night or something, but Winstons Wish gave me quite a few tools to work with that. But it was only when I was about 18 at university and having some mental health challenges that I thought were completely unrelated. And a counsellor that I was seeing actually said, I've never seen someone have a psychology as ingrained as yours about looking at other people and wanting what they have. And she kind of went, what is it that you wanted when you were younger that everyone else had? And I was like, oh, like a dad or like a complete family. I was obviously looking at everyone around me, and as much as I thought I was coping by just being like, no, it's fine, no problem, I just completely shut off, buried it, and it created this like psychological tendency that was then really damaging later. And like fortunately I was able to seek help for that. But I think that we know that grief comes in like waves, but it may really be a big gap between those waves that might be completely unexpected.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because, you know, you may seek some support at a certain age, and then you may need to, you know, grief is a journey throughout
my
life.
sister went back to Winstons Wish twice. She went there twice because she'd gone the first time with us, and then a few years later went back again, because it's not a straight line at all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the good things about the service that we offer, is that, you know, we're here, you know, it might be a year, it might be 3 years before you want to come back, but that the service is continue. We understand that it's not, you know, right, you're done, your grieving is, you know, we
no, it's not like that.
So when did you first hear about Winstons Wish?
So my mum heard about it actually from, I think, a friend of hers. To be honest, really soon after the death. It was only about 6 months, I think. And that was when we went on the residential. And my sisters and I went on one together, and my mum went on the same weekend. She went to, I think, one for parents, which kind of spoke to parents about how to deal with becoming a single parent and how to deal with the grief yourself. And yeah, we made lots. I remember making lots and lots of like physical, tangible objects that we still have now. Things like the Winstons Wish memory boxes and sand jars, and a Winstons Wish candle and teddy bear. And I know loads of other young ambassadors also still have them after probably nearly 20 years for some of us, which I think just says so much about kind of all of the things that we had about this one person have been put into a box, like a physical box that you can then go to when you feel like you need to, or something like that. And I think that the biggest thing about that was the residential being put with people in similar positions. So I think my residential wasn't specific for any type of loss. It was just, I think, just general Winstons Wish residential. But I know that they do ones which are, for example, losing someone through suicide, which is far more complex because you've got all of those extra loads of emotions and confusion around that, which I think being put in a position with someone in a similar space who's not going to judge you or not going to think anything or not going to avoid the topic with you, that's just the most powerful thing they could ever do. And yeah, that was when we went to Winstons Wish. And as I said, my sister went back, and then obviously I went back to volunteer a few years later. Yeah,
so it's impacted your life quite massively then. And I think, you know, it's interesting because the residential things aren't happening now because of COVID, and, you know, the service has changed since then, but we are looking at running groups, and I talk to a lot of young people who are really keen to be part of a group, to experience, to have a peer on peer support in a way. And it sounds like that really helped, and that that's one of the things you would take away from Winstons Wish, would you say?
Absolutely. I can't undervalue it enough. And it's not even, I don't speak to anyone I don't think I ever stayed in contact with anyone that I went with when I was 6 or 7 years old. But now some of the other young ambassadors are incredibly close friends of mine. We talk all the time, especially if it's something like Father's Day or something coming up. Like, we know just to send a chat message or just to say on the chat, oh, I'm feeling a bit rubbish today, like, anyone free to chat, anything like that, because it's just so non-judgmental. And some of these girls I've never even met, and like that they know more about my life than some of my best friends, because I can talk to them about it because they're in the exact same position, or they have been at some point. And I think, I'm not sure exactly what it is about that, but there is something so special about having those kinds of people. And that is by far the biggest thing Winstons Wish has done for me. It's just making me talk to people who are in the same position, or people who have been through a similar grief. And it's just amazing, because no one else can ever really understand that. Yeah,
and I think, you know, it's so you know, I talk to lots of young people who really want that and need that, and you know, it's a service that we need to be offering to young people. And it's amazing, isn't it, to think all those years ago, you know, you were bereaved, but you are still in contact with that, well, not the group that you were there with then, but now you're still talking to young people from Winstons Wish, which I think is incredible. So, and it's great to hear. We are launching a new service around support groups, because obviously, as Scarlett's talked about, the residential groups were really beneficial to her, and lots of fun, it sounds like. But obviously in new times we can't run the residential groups, but in June we are launching online peer-to-peer support groups, which will be supported by practitioners. And we will be posting about that on social media, and we'll keep you updated about that. So yeah, so just to move on to that then, so what if you could talk a little bit about you know, your involvement with the young ambassadors and what the sort of work you're doing with them would be really good to hear.
Yeah. So as I said, so the most recent one that we did was a project with the UK Trauma Council. It was developing an animation and some other resources for schools across the UK for traumatic bereavement, which obviously, given, I think we started working on it back in November. I think the UKTC might have been involved a bit before that on creating it. But obviously, given COVID, given lockdowns, a lot more children are dealing with that, which they've never had to deal with before. And especially if it's knowing that someone's passed away in a hospital by themselves or something like that, it could be really, really traumatizing. And it's just a whole bunch of resources on educating schools how to use them and how to help those children and support them, and just to kind of be there and, for example, letting them, encouraging them to speak about it, not shutting it down, things like that. And that was a really interesting project for me to be on, obviously working in the education system, as well as being on the same young ambassador panel with lots of my friends who were also young ambassadors, and listening to the stories that they had in school, and just some of the things that weren't done for them and some of the things that were done. It was just, you kind of forget, like, oh, that's my experience, that's completely different to a lot of other people's experiences. So being able to hear all of what they thought was really great. I've been able to do some really, really fun stuff. So I managed to go on an abseiling fundraiser with young ambassador Emily, and I kind of just turned up ready to help out and stuff. And by the end of the day, she had me jumping off the castle, which is great.
Wow.
We raised loads of money. It wasn't just messing around. But yeah, so I've had some really nice things like that. Some slightly more upsetting things I've been to represent at funerals or like memorial services for people who have passed away quite recently, leaving children. But yeah, a big mixture. There's definitely a lot of emotion involved. But all of the things, I mean, on a wider level, I know that they're helping the charity, but on a personal level, they just, like, it's almost quite selfish of me. They are really great for me to be able to meet new people and to be able to promote something I really care about, and things like that. Yeah.
And we, you know, at Winstons Wish, we value the young ambassadors hugely. You know, I mean, you support us in loads of ways, and you know the ways you've described, but also, you know, if we're interviewing, we always have a panel of young ambassadors.
There you go. So I've forgotten half of the things I've done. I did that for the Grenfell services. And we're made to feel very special.
Yeah, and I think for me, when I was interviewed for Winstons Wish, I think the young person's panel was my scariest bit of my interview. You know, that's the, you know, and it's
heard that a few times.
And it's really important to integrate you guys into our service, because you're the ones who know about, you know, what we do. So and what does your mom and your siblings think of your involvement?
Yeah, they're all very pleased with it. I mean, it was obviously, my mom thinks that the charity is just the most amazing thing in the world. She thinks that every time I say, oh, I'm doing this for Winstons Wish, she's like, oh, it's just such a great charity. She loves it. And I think my sisters are also like quite pleased that I'm doing it. No one else is involved in it. I think because of the fact that I kind of blocked everything out, I've built up a resilience to bereavement and to grief, and I can just kind of compartmentalize those different parts of my life. So I think that I'm kind of in a position where I'm able to do it. But I think that for most people, it would actually be really, really challenging. And I think that's why the young ambassadors like love being part of Winstons Wish so much, because we're all at a point in our lives where we want to help children because we were helped so much as children, that we can really see like you could go one of two ways here, and we kind of want to make sure that we're supporting the charity to ensure that all of those children are successful and have all of that support that they might need.
Great, yeah, thank you. So moving on, what are your hopes for the future, for yourself and for your work with Winstons Wish?
So for me personally, so I studied psychology at university, kind of with the long-term goal of going into being a child practitioner. I think when I went through residential, I don't remember it, but I just know that I loved anyone who helped me there, and I absolutely adored Brandon, who was our family counsellor. And yeah, there were loads of different parts that I just thought, this is what I want to do. I think having looked back now and seen the amount of help that I received and the amount of work that they did, that's definitely what I would like to end up doing. Obviously I'm teaching now, so I want to stay there for a bit longer, but yeah, working with children is something that I think has hugely come from the support that I received as a child, and again from really being given that path of you can go one of two ways, and being pushed to go the right way and to become a more resilient person instead of to shut down or face a lot of difficulties. And I think a part of that is definitely just to completely remove this taboo around talking about death, especially with children, because I think at children's ages, obviously the younger they are, the more limited their developmental skills are, and they may not understand the idea of permanency or death really as a concept because of their lack of knowledge about other things. But I think that to be able to talk about someone, or to be able to talk about the death more and more and more, is just going to be such a preventative thing in terms of any mental health challenges they might face. Being able to talk about it with their parents, with a counsellor, with their friends, anyone really, I think is so important. I know that Winstons Wish do a lot of this with like memory making and the memory boxes that they do and the sand jars and stuff. So I think that what Winstons Wish is doing already is amazing, and I just kind of want to continue it. I think we've, like as a charity, I think Winstons Wish has done loads and has hugely started to remove that taboo around talking about death with children, but I think that there's still a long way to go that I know Winstons Wish is continuing to do, and I would just love to be a part of that until it gets to kind of where it could eventually be. That's
brilliant, and it's wonderful to hear that Winstons Wish has inspired you on your, and you're in the right place, and as a teacher to go to the next stage. And I think you're
exactly inspiration for me.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right as well. And I think what I'm hearing and what you've been saying a lot, is just about let children speak about death. Let's not hide it away. Let's allow it to breathe. Let's allow children the space to explore how they're feeling. And I'm just sort of to tie up, is there any particular moment that you could highlight, like you've spoken about, I think Brandon, you said Brandon, or that you felt is a highlight of your Winstons Wish journey?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a running joke amongst the young ambassadors about the fact that some of us were invited to go to a hotel thing at the start of the young ambassadors launch, which was really great because it was just a room of about 10 or so people between the ages of 17 and 25 who had all been through Winstons Wish, had all lost someone, most of us a parent, and we could just talk about it. And I think it was the first time since going to the residentials or the camps for a lot of us that you could actually just talk about death and not be like, oh, I'm upsetting this person, or oh, that person. Because a lot of people, when they react to you, when you say, oh, this happened to me, whatever it was, they all say, oh, I'm so sorry. And then you feel awkward, and then you feel guilty, and then it creates a whole situation that you then don't want to have to deal with. So sometimes you just don't say anything about it. Whereas that group of people, you can just talk and talk because so many of your experiences are so similar. And I think Grace, who's the young ambassador, said it so perfectly. She said that the worst thing that could possibly happen has already happened. So anything you say isn't going to make it worse. So it's better to say something than to just sit there silently and make the other person feel awkward. And I think that's so perfect. Like what you say isn't going to make a difference. It's only going to help because it's going to normalize the fact that we can talk about this. And I think, so that hotel launch was definitely one of the best experiences for me.
That's great. That's really nice to hear. So I think that's great, and I want to say massive thank you Scarlett, for talking. It's been lovely to chat to you and hear about your experiences with Winstons Wish. And thank you to everybody here watching this with us. Thank you for your support, and it's thanks to your contributions that we are able to continue our work, and we massively thank you, and thanks for listening to us today. Thanks, Scarlett.
Thank you.